Heather is our speaker, and she earned a master's in library and information science and a Bachelor of Science in marketing from the University of Rhode Island. And she currently works as the assistant archivist at the Steamship Historical Society of America. So we're glad to have her here today, and I'll hand it over to her.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you joined today. Even though the weather is amazing, it sounds like through most of the country, I really am glad to be able to sit and talk about immigration via steamship. It is a topic near and dear to my heart as a genealogist and someone who actually descends from quite a few lines that came over from Europe, whether it's Irish, English, Scottish, French Canadians, and Polish. So there couldn't be a better collection to talk about immigration than the Steamship Historical Society's collection. Founded in 1935, the Steamship Historical Society was a group of people that were like-minded, probably like us, interested in history, interested in maritime travel. Many of these people had the opportunity, or their parents had the opportunity, to travel on some of these amazing ocean liners, and some were actually working on these ships. The future is for the Steamship Historical Society to make sure that we preserve, record, and educate others on any vessel with an engine in it, and that did start with steam. The three themes: immigration, but also trade and leisure. I had the opportunity to work with the collection, as I mentioned, because I am now a professional archivist, but first and foremost, I've been a genealogist since the age of 12. The reason why I went back to school to become an archivist is I realized that some of the best resources aren't available online. However, we're doing our best at the Steamship Historical Society to provide you a searchable database. And you see our website there, sshsa.org. And the wonderful component about being an archivist is being able to touch all these amazing things, organize them, and make them available. This example here is the Alexander Shaw collection. I think you will find it interesting. The time period matches what we're looking at, 1906 on up. And Alexander Shaw had this amazing ability of organizing thousands of photos. And then you had a whole nother section that was just all of his notes, perfectly organized with an index. As an archivist, you couldn't ask for a better donation of a collection. On top of research notes, there's over 10,000 books in the reference library located in Rhode Island. You are able to see us online, but you could always give us a call, and you can schedule an appointment to visit if you'd like. There is ephemera collection, there are ship plans and objects. You can check out our finding aids on archivesgrid.com, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a couple of minutes. So let's start to put some context about our talk today. Most likely you're coming in thinking about specific ancestors that you want to look at. And we're looking at the immigration patterns from 1850 to 1920. This is the bulk of the time that we had that massive immigration. And it was all because the steamship line companies were able to create a business model that was able to make the steamships more reliable, faster, and at maximum capacity. That resulted in so many of us enjoying things. Yes, the Titanic, but the beautiful ocean liners. This is an example from the Vincent Love collection that we have. He was part of the industry and he adored ocean liners like this French line steamship, the France. You can see in here that every single space on this ship is maximized to capacity, and that made a difference. But steamships didn't start the immigration. It was the Mayflower. And yes, I do have a descendant that came over, Samuel Sewell. Maybe some of you are cousins. And an issue of social distancing really didn't come up at that point, but we'll talk about how that still affects us today. The crossing only took 66 days. They started with 102, and I unfortunately believe that that particular voyage ended with about half of those people by the end of the trip. I am located in Narragansett, so I have the pleasure of having those roots, but also sitting next to high school friends who are actually from the Narragansett Nation, the current tribe that has taken care of this land for quite some time before the Europeans came by. Let's go ahead and fast forward 200 years. Suddenly, it became a little easier to get across the Atlantic, but it was with a wing and a prayer. This is the Savannah. It crossed for the first time with some steam power in 1819. But a lot of people didn't believe in the capabilities of Captains Moses and Stephen Rogers. They really wouldn't sign up to be on their vessels. So what they ended up having to do is, instead of leaving out of New York, they had to go back to Connecticut, where there was enough people that they could cajole to go on this packet ship made out of wood. They retrofitted it. Think of it a little bit like a Prius. This is a hybrid model. And they were able to get overseas in 29 days, which is a definite improvement. But the problem is, when you put a engine on it, retrofitting it, putting a side paddle, there's some reliability issues. So much so that they actually did not carry a single passenger, just the crew, because they weren't really convinced on how successful that trip is. But thankfully, the business model motivated the steamship line companies to implement science, technology, engineering, and mechanics, so that way they could improve the steamship passenger travel. And it hinged on safety and reliability, speed, and capacity. This is an oil painting on canvas, again from the Love Collection. You can see this and many other components from the Love Collection on our virtual exhibit. And the reason why this is a perfect example is it shows how, even when they had iron and steel hulls, they still had the sails there just in case the steam engine didn't work. They soon were able to create the reliability that resulted in mass migration. They did it through safety and reliability. This is an example from the Lusitania. After the disaster, it was first hit by a German U-boat, but what happened was an explosion after that. That spirited a lot of technology and being able to turn off different parts of the engine to prevent future disasters. It was even the river boats, which, yeah, not necessarily related to immigration, but the disasters that were happening with boilers exploding really created some nervousness in the market to jump on a ship and go across the sea. So once they were able to improve the engine and get more efficiency, they were able to even make them more efficient by recycling the steam for a second pass. And they found that they were able to get to their place of destination with the power to get reduce days, making them more reliable and attractive. One of the first customers, so to speak, of the passenger ships were the mail from the government. Both the US and the British created packet ships, but they also realized that there's opportunity to have passengers as well. When they were making the transatlantic crossings, they went from 66 days, like we talked about in the 1600s, down to 29. But by 1907, it took 4.5 days to cross the Atlantic. And it actually took over 30 years before someone else was able to create the Queen Mary, which finally broke that record to 4 days. But we have the reliability and we're getting more people on, and now we have the speed to get across. So how do we maximize if we are a steam line? We're going to increase capacity. This is another example from the Vincent Love collection, and it's showing the city of Rome, which was part of the Anchor Line. And it's coming into Ellis Island, which started in 1892 as a incoming port and inspection station for immigrants. This has an iron hull. You still see the mast for the sails, but this was such a lucrative business that this expensive ship that was created for the line was rejected by the line in 1882 because it wasn't fast enough. So they sold it and invested in another ship. So everything was about maximizing the dollar. Another way they did it is by adding steerage. You can see here the exclusive 75 first class passengers would all know each other and spend a great deal of time dining and entertaining themselves. The 250 second class passengers were a middle class market that was invented by the Inman Line, because the rest, the 1,000 steerage, are not assigned to any specific area that's unique to them. Steerage is one large holding room, often the converted cargo hold, and that made for an opportunity for those who might not be able to afford the travel, and it gave them the chance to come and seek out the dream that they were hoping for. But unfortunately, it also came with a great deal of concern for the health and welfare of those passengers. One of the ties to the disease that was seen in steerage, with everyone not social distancing like the cartoon I showed you at the beginning, it was also associated with some stereotypes for those people who were immigrating. This unfortunate news article talks about a recent outbreak of typhoid fever. And you can see here, this is the only kind of raw material that is imported nowadays. And it points to the cheap steerage steamships. Not only does the raw material come to us in a dirty condition, but is an infected or infective. Unfortunately, this also created the stereotypes against anti-Catholic laws and social reform. The temperance movement came out of the immigration, where the temperance, women's Christian temperance union would actually alienate the Irish, the Catholics, the French, and portray them as drunkens that needed to be stopped. That then came across for other nationalities, including the Chinese in 1882 with the Exclusion Acts. And then finally, it wasn't until the 1890s that the first immigration station was set up, both in Ellis Island and other ports, including Canada. We'll talk about that in a second. Finally, in 1917, they were even issuing literacy laws where anyone over 16 had to prove that they were competent enough to enter the country. This is a political cartoon. You can also find this on the Steamship Historical Society's website, along with the educational tools. If any of you are teachers or have children that are in the school system studying immigration, I highly recommend checking out the educational resources that are available for free. We still, in America, are talking about the effects of immigration, and it's interesting to see that we're facing that same mirror again. You will continue to look at immigration through the eyes of history, but it affects us today. And one of the reasons why I'm a genealogist is because I truly believe that when you're doing your research on your lines, no matter where you're from, it's almost impossible to not see the effects of immigration, racism, and colonialism, like this example shows today. All right, so we've talked about the concept of immigration. It was affected mostly from the business model of steamships that applied STEM technology to make it safer, more reliable, faster, and maximize capacity. The negative effect was there were laws created by the government, but to genealogists, we think that's fabulous because those create new record sets for us to dig into. You see here on the slide, there is the handout, which was referenced at the beginning. That's available for you. It's also on the Steamship Historical Society website, if you'd like to check it out there. I'm gonna go through some of the components that are listed on that guide, so you don't need to take notes unless you really want to. You always start with what you know or with what people think they know. This is the chance to go back, look at photos, engage the oldest person in your family to talk about anything that they know. And of course, never be satisfied with, I don't know. There are different ways to engage them. And you'll find that you might just see in the census, there are new information that you can share back with them that might trigger some new ideas. Thankfully, the census from 1900 to the 1930s started asking specific questions so that the government could actually measure the effects of immigration. Here are some headers from the census from the 1900, 1910, and 1930. I'd also like to recommend a book. It is Democracy's Data, The Hidden Stories in the U.S. Census. It's a new release, and it was fantastic and very approachable. And it talks a lot about the issues of why the census asks the questions that it did and does today. When searching in the census, the pro tip is always the blackjack or asterisk when searching in names. With a last name like Kisilywicz, believe it or not, it was spelled a few different ways. So by inserting that in different areas, I'm able to hopefully finally find the person that I'm looking for. I know many of us use ancestry.com. I do as well, but please don't ignore the fact that you can also find censuses for free at the National Archives and familysearch.org. So let's peek into my personal closet of skeletons and look at my family. I always start with the census after talking to my family because it does include the specific question of when they immigrated. This is the example of the census in Connecticut in 1900. Highlighted in blue here is my family. Actually, it's William, the last person, the father, who's living with his son, daughter-in-law, and granddaughter. Notice over on the right, 1869. For 30 years, he's lived here as an alien, and that's not uncommon for someone to decide not to file for naturalization. So they gave us the information. Often we'll get so excited because we'll find our research target on a census, we'll read the transcript, but do you always go and actually look at the document? I highly encourage you to. Obviously, this is giving us some clues on when he came, but there's another clue here. We don't know what port William came through, but there is a clue. Can anyone find it? It's based on the birth of the son, Samuel Gervin. He was born in New York, but as I mentioned, this census is from Connecticut. This gives me a clue that at some point they lived in New York and possibly came in through that port. We immediately think of Ellis Island, of course, but again, that station didn't open until 1892. Looking at my own immigrant list, I have quite a few people who came in 1865, 1883, but our natural reaction, rightly so, is to go to the Ellis Island website and search. That I did, and luckily enough with this particular case, but not other ancestors, I typed in William Gervin, and I did find my target right here. Unfortunately, though, when you do click to get that information, it does kindly ask you to donate and become a member in order to access that information. As I mentioned, there are sources that you can find this, such as the National Archives or familysearch.org, to find census and passenger lists. But also, this is a good opportunity to support the causes that you love. So I might actually join. So now that I know when he came, I'm going to go in, I'm going to look at passenger lists or manifests. In 1830, all steamship companies were required to present a manifest when they came into the United States. I was able to find that William Gervin and his wife, Catherine, came in, 1865, I believe it was, through the port of New York on the Plymouth Rock. So this is a gold mine, and I'm very excited. The sad part about it is I did find only one incidence of William Gervin Jr. at 3. Most likely, he passed away within the first year of arriving in the United States. Unfortunately, Catherine also passed away within 5 years. Passenger lists can be found in other spots. Stephen Morris by far has a fantastic website. I do like to joke that it still looks like it came from 1980, but God bless him, it is a fabulous resource. When looking into the different ports, if you haven't been able to find which one, you might have to start to look around. Consider adding a plus or minus of years, widen the time frame, even though on the census you're convinced that they told you exactly when they came in. Sometimes memories are tricky, or it could be the person reporting the information as well. When you look at a passenger list, you may see quite a few notes. You're seeing notations, X's. This happens to be for a recent immigrant. This is Grandma Wakefield. She came over in 1928 on the Celtic from Liverpool. And you'll notice on here, they're specifically marking that Uncle Bob was a US citizen born in the United States, even though he was a child. And Graham Wakefield is under 18. In fact, she's still an infant. She's not even a year old. Notice all these different markings in here. Again, always go and look at the original source or the digital image of it to get a better understanding of the material that might not be listed in the transcript. Not everyone came through New York, however, and there are other routes. In fact, it doesn't seem like someone coming from Canada came via steamship, but they did. It actually was a marketing tip for the steam lines to say if you come through Canada, stopping at either Nova Scotia or Quebec City, it's cheaper and easier. Your immigrants may have come this way and immediately come down across the border to the US or stuck around for a little bit. In 1884, the Canadian agreement placed US inspectors in each of these ports. And it was because there was an agreement between all the different lines of transportation, not only the steamships, but the railroads that were often owned by the same lines to get people from shore to their destination. This also created a wealth of documents, including the St. Albans list. You can find that at the National Archives, FamilySearch.org, and also the Canadian National Archives. So we mentioned that William Girving never decided to file for naturalization. However, there is a two-step process that some of your immigrants did. Sometimes you're not starting at the census. You're looking for any potential needle in the haystack. With this particular ancestor, this is Sam Bowler. He is my great-grandfather. He came over from Ireland to Canada, and he filled out, thankfully, his declaration of intent. And what a glorious source this is. Unfortunately, I haven't found this document for many other immigrants, but for him, we did. You can see that he lists everything from his current age to the age when he arrived, where he currently lives, where he worked when he first arrived. He happened to get a job with the railroads in Canada and then was eventually transferred down to the United States in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Whether it's a declaration of intent, which is usually filed at local courts, you might also consider checking your state archives, which may have digitalized them. The second step would then to be petition for naturalization, and those records are at the National Archives. I believe they have both the documents and an index. So if you're searching on the National Archives and see just an index card with an abbreviated version of the information, continue to search. We might not feel completely finished until we actually visualize our immigrant on the ship. But many of my immigrants came before popular cameras, so therefore we do sometimes rely on artwork. The Steamship Historical Society does have a great amount of artwork from our researchers, as well as books that they've actually published themselves to capture this history. This is Plymouth Rock, which made the transatlantic cross. And you can also find, if you look into the Steamship Historical Society's database, also Ancestry.com has images. And finally, check out the Mystic Seaport website. They're all interactive. Ancestry is not free, but it's usually easy to search. So there's a couple of options for you. As an archivist, we're always trying to make our collections available to you. So since 1935, the nucleus of our collection of those first members continues to expand. We make sure that the finding aids for our largest, most relevant collections are available to you. So check out archivesgrid.com. Some collections that you might find most relevant are the T.H. Franklin collection. That is from a company based in New York that was actually a shipbroker. And they would actually take a photo and create a negative and then distribute those photos as a form of marketing promotion. What we have are the glass negatives from each of those photos. Over 1,800 business records are associated with each one of those ships, and more than half of them actually have a photo. The H. Graham Wood collection also covers the time period between 1882 to 1968. The Alexander Shaw collection, when we first started the presentation, you saw those different cabinets. His collection covers steamship history between 1900 to 1970. The Lockhead collection and the Federal Steam Shipbuilding collection also might be relevant to your searches. So we've talked about the context, and that's what historical societies like the Steamship Historical Society do. Their mission is to make sure that we preserve and share this information, as well as create educational tools for free. And you can see how our current students will really appreciate how STEM and STEAM were put in steamships. We created engines because we are highly motivated business people to make them more reliable, safe, fast, and increase capacity. And when it wasn't necessarily passengers, every other space was filled as well, whether it be for mail or cargo bulk shipping. Because of the massive immigration between 1850 to 1920 resulting from those technology improvements and business motivation, significant social reform and policy were the reaction. That is exactly what genealogists like us are looking for, and that resulted in some key record sources. The census actually has specific questions on it about immigration. The requirement of passenger lists started in 1830, well before immigration inspection stations. Border crossings are also part because it might not necessarily be arriving on a US port, it could be in Canada. And then finally, naturalization records, both for the petition, the intent to become naturalized, and the declaration. If we can find a ship photo, that's fabulous, but it might actually be a drawing. I'm hoping that you feel inspired by this and you're ready to stay up for a few nights. Grab your favorite snack, create and use a research log. I know how difficult that is because we just want to click on the next link. But as you create that research log, if you continue to write your findings, you have the basis to publish and share. Now, I did actually become an archivist because I wanted to learn where these sources were that I wasn't finding online. But as an archivist, I also hope that you will contribute your findings. You've created all of these links with documents, and you've outlined a life that really needs to be shared and preserved. Whether it's your genealogical society, a historical society, or your local library, I really do hope that you will document and create even just a bio sketch and submit it. Finally, if these are the types of things that you find helpful, whether it's attending workshops like this or going online to sshsa.org, I hope you'll consider making a donation or becoming a member. So with that, I will turn it back to you, and I'm sure we have a bunch of questions.
The first one is, someone is asking, what do you recommend when different census reports for a relative give different years of immigration?
when we talk about immigration, we have to differentiate it from arrivals. So, for example, Sam Bowler, who came over from Ireland to Canada, he went back and forth multiple times, actually. So he arrived, but it wasn't necessarily the year that he stayed. So it is very possible that they are going back and forth. And it could also be because they came over first, stayed with family or cousins or neighbors that they were connected with, and then went back and brought the rest of the family with them when they had enough money. So it is very possible there are different years of arrival, which might be tied to their immigration journey.
Someone else is wondering if the society has records associated with the agents who sold the tickets
The
for
agents,
immigration.
I will have to look, but on the top of my mind, I don't think that we do have the agent's information. And I'm going to keep thinking about it and try to think of where you might be able to find that. Of course, the St. Albans records were the agents up in Canada. Ellis Island has. I'm thinking that the National Archives is going to be your best source for that.
The next one is wondering about locating a passenger list of an immigrant going back to Poland in 1909, 1911, that time frame, if you might have any suggestions for research.
So yeah, we're going to look for a manifest for that. And I'm assuming you're getting that date. Let's see, maybe it's from information that the family has shared. I'm not sure. Yeah, going back to your passenger list, try Stephen Morris. There might be something specific to ethnicity, the way he breaks down that outline. That might be one of your best bets. Another thought is try Cindy's list.
So we have a question about slavery ships during the 1700s. I think they're wondering about resources for researching those ships.
Yeah. Because that's out of the scope that I'm covering with engine technology, and also I'm not an expert in forced migration. So I wouldn't be able to give you much help in that.
Anyone is also welcome. If you have any additional questions or anything like that, you're welcome to send us an email at genealogy@acpl.info. We'll stick that in the chat. Someone else is wondering if you could discuss the deaths of passengers on board the ships. How was it documented?
There were actually reports given in Congress by a committee that was looking into the health and welfare, and that ended up creating the different laws that we have. Going into the Library of Congress, you should be able to see those reports that were created by the government. There are awful lot of great books. They're not primary sources, but the secondary sources will outline the horrific travel of someone who is an immigrant in steerage. I think of Angela's Ashes, but that's because I have Irish roots. Even though those are, again, not primary sources, they can really give you a glimpse on what the life is like and some context around it.
Someone else is wondering, how do you find a ship with a common name? In this case, the ship was named the Immigrant. And this particular one sailed from Bremen to New York in 1851. So do you have any search suggestions for finding ships with similar or common names?
Ships are exactly like people, and we joke about it, and it's really not a joke that the bio of a ship and then different names that they had over a course of time, it is challenging. Do check out the Steamship Historical Society's database. We continue to add more information routinely. There are some quality sites out there. I'm thinking of G&G, and I'm trying to think of I'll try to think of what the name of that is, but you will find bios on ships, and there are hidden clues in there about the line that owned them, the ports that they use, but specifically look at the time frame that it was built, and also look at the size. There is a source called the Lloyd's Register, and that specifically has a official number for each of the ships, and you can somewhat track them over time as they were passed by different companies to each other. So the Lloyd's Register, we do have the Lloyd's Register at the Steamship Historical Society. So if you have a reference question Or if you'd like additional research, we have a form on the site for that.
Someone is asking about research via immigration centers overseas. I'm wondering what your experience might be with that
Yeah.
for family information.
I'm first to tell you when I don't know anything, and I do not know anything on that. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, feel free to send us an email and uh, we can look into your specific question for the area that you're researching. So, um,
I will say that I do recommend checking out the APG website, the
mhm.
Association of Professional Genealogists, because that is where you can specifically tap into someone who is an expert in that area. For me personally, anybody who is in the United States, I hope I can track them down. But the minute it comes to their lives overseas, I'm always going to refer myself to someone else who can do the research faster and better than I can.
If somebody is born on a ship, where do you find that information, and what would their country of origin be?
That's a really good question.
That is.
Um, yeah, I honestly don't know. And I would guess that no matter what answer we do provide, it was situational. I wouldn't be surprised if some passengers, based on the time period or the line, were treated differently. I just, I hope that someone in the comment might actually be able to add that.
It says for this person's immigrant ancestor on her naturalization papers, she gave her arrival on a particular ship and date, but doing research, he's not able to find the ship at this time that she gave. So, what steps would you recommend?
You're going to try maybe a fan approach. As you know, we're looking at family, associates, neighbors. It's possible someone else came on the ship at the same time, and you might be able to find their paperwork that either backs up. So, unfortunately, it's really hard to find no evidence, but you have to keep trying in order to exhaust all resources. So, consider cousins, brothers, and sisters. Look at their papers and see if they might have come or claim they came at the same time.
Someone is looking for sources that record immigrants' accounts of their journeys and
Mhm.
wondering if you have anything in mind that you would recommend.
The Steamship Historical Society does have some on the Italian American passage. We did have quite a few citizens come in through Providence, and we have a large Italian population. I believe the Library of Congress also has some oral histories that would document that. And I think that you'll be able to find something associated with Ellis Island in their other sources, not just the database. Finally, the Tenement Museum, which is located in New York, has a fabulous collection. Both if you ever get the chance to visit the museum, but you can also go online and they have some documentation on the experience that the different nationalities faced when they came over.
Thank you so much, Heather, for presenting today. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody for attending.
Thank you so much. I hope you guys
Thank
stay up
you.
late tonight.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.